I'm presenting a paper titled Digital Media Transition Cases from Philippine Newsrooms with my colleague, Professor Christian V.S. Guerra. We are from the University of Santo Tomas in Manila. The impact of the internet and the emergence of digital platforms on the news media and newsroom operations have long been the subject of research and commentary. Things began on a very hopeful and optimistic note. The internet was heralded as a tool for news gathering and research that journalists and editors must learn how to use. Computer-assisted reporting became a specialized field. The internet continues to be a very powerful tool for seeking out information, and more so with the kind of information ecosystem that it had created. Its profound impact, however, has been on the way in which news is produced and consumed. Technological upheavals have historically hastened the news cycle up to the point where news desks have become 24/7 operations. Deadlines have shortened considerably due to the need to break the news immediately to outdo competitors. The new media have freed newsrooms from the various constraints imposed by the old media, such as the tight space or the news hole. It became a boon for long-form journalism and multimedia journalism. The unidirectional mass media model was rendered obsolete, and it became easier to send or receive feedback from the public, especially with the advent of social media. The new media, moreover, had a democratizing effect. Citizen journalism, in which regular citizens can serve as reporters in their localities, served as force multipliers for news gathering and filled in big gaps in reporting. The convergence model emerged as a way to interconnect different media platforms, old and new, and seamlessly report the news across them. Newsrooms eventually shifted to a digital-first strategy, making online assets the hub of news distribution, and as the internet and digital devices became more accessible. The print edition declined in importance. Newsrooms also required reporters to possess multimedia and mobile journalism skills to be able to publish on these multiple platforms. In reality, however, the transition process was a very messy one. More than 2 decades after, trust in news and the reach of news are low and on declining trajectories. This paper is a preliminary investigation into the kind of role the messy transition into digital platforms played in the overall decline of news. The gaps or spaces that the news media did not or failed to occupy as it negotiated this transition, one could argue, have been taken over by others that are not subject to the same professional and editorial standards as journalism, and therefore are more susceptible to purveyors of disinformation. The case of the Philippines could be instructive to other democracies, given the development of a free press after American colonization, an interlude of authoritarian rule under the dictator Ferdinand Marcos, and a return to a democratic and media system controlled by the economic and political elites. Today, the Philippines has another Marcos as president, who has vowed to protect the freedom of the press 4 decades after his father crushed it. Now, due to the time constraint, we will turn our focus to the Philippine print media's experience with convergence. Print media are in the English language due to colonial influence. It is a strength as it predisposes the print media to the global news audience that is English proficient. But it is also a weakness as it means the print media are not preferred by majority of Filipinos who mainly speak the national and the many regional languages. The convergence strategy was promising at first and was characterized by the creation of new corporate entities, whether as subsidiaries or affiliates. In reality, these entities were entirely new business units with their own ownership structure, management, and even editorial and production staff, and designed to leverage the reputation of the established legacy media brand names while keeping costs down. The top daily newspaper, the Philippine Daily Inquirer, joined forces with the television network, GMA, to put up a joint news portal called inq7.net. But the joint venture split up into separate news sites in 2006, Inquirer.net and GMA News Online, after a 7-year experiment over advertising revenues. The owners of the Philippine Star, another major broadsheet, went out on its own and incorporated Philstar Global, a new entity to hold all digital assets, and in a separate location from the newspaper operations. The first to adopt this model was a smaller news operation, Business World, the first business daily newspaper in Southeast Asia, which formed a new corporation, Business World Online Incorporated, in the mid-1990s. Now, these convergence experiments were not an overwhelming success because of several factors. Number one, the traditional convergence model adopted by these newspapers generally lacked imagination. The online news platforms simply carried content from print with occasional breaking stories. Second, the reluctance of a wider segment of legacy newsrooms to adopt a digital-first strategy. Many journalists and editors still saw themselves as part of separate newsrooms, print and online, and were bent on keeping their turfs and established work routines. Third, separate corporate entities under the Inquirer and Philstar Group established very formidable firewalls between print and online. Separate business units for online news mean reporters from either entity received different salaries and benefits. This raised the issue of economic disparity. Newspaper editors and reporters naturally received more benefits, mainly because of their tenure. Unlike online media recruits, who had to make do with whatever resources the management was willing to risk on the digital experiment. The newspapers, number four, the newspapers simply transplanted or loaned or seconded editors and reporters to the staff of online newsrooms. These journalists, while maybe good at what they were used to in print, did not necessarily have a deep understanding of how journalism works in the digital space and the vast opportunities the platform offered. Newspapers sent the dinosaurs to the digital age. Number five, the digital business units earned a lot of advertising money, partly from shoveling print stories and generating some of their own digital-first content, but did not invest significantly in improving news gathering and editorial operations. The lack of resources meant that the news websites did not attract good talent, especially editors who could properly train reporters and enforce strict editorial and professional standards. Now, 2 decades since the transition, The results for converged print media are unflattering in terms of reach, despite the wider audiences on the internet brought about by higher internet and mobile device penetration. The online editions of the top newspapers are used once a week by less than 40% of Filipinos, according to the 2022 Digital News Report of the Reuters Institute and Oxford University. The usage rates are much lower for thrice weekly use. Television networks have been more successful in their online ventures in terms of weekly and thrice weekly use. And Rappler, the news website established by Nobel laureate Maria Ressa, has a 30% reach and is doing better than most other news websites despite having a late head start. The early foray of the Philippine news leaders, the Philippine Daily Inquirer and the Philippine Star, into online journalism was a cautionary tale of limited success and missed opportunities. But there are bright spots. More than a decade later, Philstar Global is gaining more traction with Generation Z oriented content, mainly owing to a now youthful newsroom teeming with imagination. Freed from the worn out newsroom conventions and old ways of thinking, they have been adaptive enough despite the lack of resources to go into podcasts, short videos, and creative use of memes to catch readers' attention. In contrast, Inquirer.net is still trying to move past its old convergence model that didn't work despite enjoying the benefits of sharing the legacy media's brand. Despite not having their own news operations, Facebook and YouTube are the top sources of news, used by 73% and 57% of Filipinos every week, respectively. Twitter and TikTok are slowly but surely expanding their reach. Now, unlike in the previous technological upheavals, telegraph, radio, television, the industry remains behind the curve, and this is even as social media has passed its peak. The Atlantic magazine, in fact, has very recently proclaimed the end of the social media age. The industry has to strategize if it wants to get ahead of the curve with new and potentially disruptive technologies like generative AI emerging in the market. This is a sobering reality that Philippine news websites will have to confront. Jen Kuye.